Homage to the Buddha, the Dhamma and the Sangha. Today we're looking at the story of Sakka, and this is in reference to the Dhammapada Verses uttered by the Buddha in verses 206, 207 and 208. And the story behind these verses is actually quite uplifting and also an encouragement towards certain things as well. Now, at the time, according to the Dhammapada commentary, the Buddha was staying at this village called Veluvas village, which was near Vesali. And this was around 10 months before the Buddha realized parinibbana. And while he was staying at this village, he came down with an illness. He suffered from dysentery. And it was interesting. The story goes that Sakka, king of the Devas, learned that the Buddha was sick. And so he came directly to Veluva village so that he could personally nurse the Buddha during his sickness. And the Buddha told him not to worry, as there were many bhikkhus near him, but Sakka didn't listen and kept on nursing the Buddha until he recovered. As you can imagine, the bhikkhus were very surprised and somewhat awestruck that Sakka, king of the Devas, had come to personally attend to the Buddha. And when the Buddha heard their remarks, he said, "Bhikkhus, there is nothing surprising about Sakka's reverence and devotion to me. Once when the former Sakka was growing old and was about to pass away, he came to see me. Then I expounded the Dhamma to him. While listening to the Dhamma, he attained fruit of stream entry. Then he passed away and was reborn as the present Sakka. All these happened to him simply because he listened to the Dhamma expounded by me. Indeed, bhikkhus, it is good to see the noble ones, the Aryas. It is a pleasure to live with them and associate with them. To live with fools is indeed painful." And then the Buddha uttered these 3 verses in sequence. "Seeing the noble ones is good. Association is always pleasant. By not seeing fools, one is constantly happy and well. By association with and acting with fools, one grieves a long time. Living with fools is always painful, like living with an enemy. Living with the wise is pleasant, like a gathering of relatives. Therefore, a sage, wise and learned, able to carry the burden of virtue, dutiful to spiritual practice and noble. Follow a good and wise person such as this, as the moon follows the path of the stars." This story of Sakka is actually a very useful one for us because the story actually gives us a very direct link between associating with good people, hearing the true Dhamma, and stream entry. So, as we know, there are 4 factors leading to stream entry that Venerable Sariputta answered to the Buddha. And this was in chapter 55, discourse number 5, the Duttiya Sariputta Sutta. And with these factors leading to stream entry, you can see with Sakka, king of the Devas, because he was associating with the Buddha before he became the present Sakka, king of the gods, king of the Devas, he listened to the teaching of the Buddha and then he realized fruit of stream entry. And of course, he was very blessed to have been able to hear true Dhamma from a Buddha. In our case, it's slightly different. There's no Buddha at this time now. But there are noble ones. And there are the teachings of the Buddha. And so this is a very strong encouragement to remember and to see the link between associating with the right people, the good people, listening to the true Dhamma, and being encouraged towards entering the stream. Now, the words that the Buddha uses are very pointed. Like in reference to noble ones, the Buddha says it's good, that it's always pleasant, and things of that nature. And there's one word that Buddha uses called sannivāso in relation to association. And this word can also be translated into living with. So in some cases, some of us may be living with noble ones. Noble ones in the sense of the 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings, that there may be some of us that have entered the stream, that have practiced further and developed further path and fruit. And so when you are living with, associating with noble ones, the Buddha says it is good and it is always pleasant. And in contrast, you won't be seeing fools, and therefore you will be happy and well. Now, it's quite interesting when the Buddha actually refers to these bāla, which is the fools. He has this term Bālasaṅgatacārī, which means association with and acting with fools. Now, the Saṅgata is association with, and Chari can be translated as acting, practicing, behaving, that sort of thing. So when you're around fools, you can imagine you're actually doing a bit of a following and indulging and doing, I guess, wrong things when you associate with the wrong company. And what the Buddha says is that when you do so, you end up grieving for a very long time. It's always painful to be around them, and it's like living with an enemy. There's a few things to understand from this. The first is that fools normally lead you down the wrong path, the kumagga sevana. So cultivating the wrong path. They're not the ones that lead you towards the Noble Eightfold Path. And therefore they're not the ones leading you to reducing the amount of dukkha, safeguarding you from the plains of misery, and definitely not from liberation. In fact, it is only the wise one, the good people, the sappurisa, who actually encourage you and direct you towards the Noble Eightfold Path, and therefore less suffering, away from the plains of misery, and therefore to ultimately liberation at some point. So the Buddha's warning there, it's like living with an enemy. And the way you can understand this is that a friend encourages you towards good, tries to safeguard you, tries to protect you. An enemy doesn't. An enemy can, not do that, or it could encourage you towards even worse. And so it's good to always think about, contemplate some of these words and why the Buddha uses them and uses certain ways of helping us to understand. In contrast, the Buddha says that when you live with the wise, then it's pleasant and it's like gathering of relatives. So it's not a gathering of relatives where you have squabbles and issues with certain relatives. Just think of gathering of relatives where you're happy to be there and everyone gets along type thing. Everyone's following the same type of understanding. And then the last verse that the Buddha talks about is he gives the description about the sage or the wise person. So this person is wise, so endowed with wisdom, endowed with higher learning. So wisdom being paññañca and bahussutañca, which is the the learned or the higher learning. And then also doreya sila, which is able to carry the burden of virtue. And then vatavanta is dutiful to spiritual practice, or it could be observant of religious practices or spiritual practices, or it could be dutiful to observances, things of that nature. And then aryang being noble. And so the advice at the end of these statements is, to follow the good and wise person, such as this, as the moon follows the path of the stars. And so in the example of Sakka, king of the Devas, you see how when he has followed the Buddha in the past and still following the Buddha even now, that what is the blessing of that can only be good things, that ultimately Sakka would develop further, and also he would remain happy and well, and it would always be pleasant to be around Buddha or anyone who practices similar to the Buddha and the Arahants. And so that's the encouragement for us to always remember, whether we've entered the stream or not, it's good to associate with ones who have the good virtue, who have the higher learning, who have developed some wisdom, who exert themselves towards spiritual practice, towards the teachings of the Buddha, who take refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha, and who demonstrate, the good qualities of conviction, moral shame, fear of wrongdoing, energetic, mindful, wise. and learning. So these are the things that is the encouragement from this story, but also as a way of understanding the link of these factors towards stream entry. The story of Sakka makes reference to a good person or sappurisa, and it's good to know what the Buddha defines as a sappurisa, because it is not what we would conventionally call a good person. There's actually more to that. And if you go to the suttas, you see that a good person is one that keeps precepts, including avoiding alcohol. A good person is also someone that has conviction and other good qualities. A good person keeps precepts, including avoiding various kinds of wrong speech. A good person practices the 10 ways of wholesome deeds or wholesome actions. So this is dasakusala. A good person practices the Eightfold Path and also practices the Tenfold Path. And lastly, in the case of this list, which is not exhaustive, it says a good person does not disparage others or feel superior because of their attainments. And actually that last one is a really good one, because often one of the really poor qualities is actually to continually raise yourself and belittle others. And it's very difficult to be around people that do that, when knowingly or unknowingly you demonstrate that you feel superior, that you believe you are superior to others. And so a sappurisa really tries not to do that. And of course, none of us are perfect, even on the spiritual path, but it's one of the things that is really not cultivated by a sappurisa. So you can see from this list that it's a different list from what you would conventionally call a good person. So conventionally you might think a good person is someone that helps me, a good person is someone that praises me, or a good person is someone that looks after their mother and father. And no doubt there are conventional things that a sappurisa in the Buddha's terms would do the same as in conventional terms. But this is much more specific to cultivating the Buddha's teaching. And when you think about the first factor leading to stream entry being sappurisa saṅsevo, which is associating with the good person, then you know that associating with such a person as defined by the Buddha, by these suttas, that it can only lead to good things. It can only keep you on the Noble Eightfold Path or bring you to the Noble Eightfold Path. It could inevitably lead to less dukkha. And ultimately, if one practices with noble beings, good people, then you may be able to prevent being reborn into the planes of misery and not have countless rebirths, delimit them to only a maximum of 7 or less. And so you can actually probably, when you look at this list, you can probably ascertain in your own mind that there are people around you, that people you listen to or people you associate with already or would want to associate with, who are living up to this definition of sappurisa. And even more than that, sappurisatara is another term that the Buddha uses, and that is a good person that encourages others to walk the Eightfold Path, to come towards the true teachings and to liberate themselves. And so that's sappurisatara. And so you probably also know people like that. And so the encouragement really is to continue associating with such people, or in some cases living with such people, and also to actually know that there is a blessing in it. And in that way, it's not just about developing stream entry, it can also help to develop further. And that's one of those things that when it comes to associating with the right people, they're the ones that help you to develop and grow, see what you can't see, and enable you to push past the blocks and the defilements and the hindrances and all those other things that prevent, subvert one's practice. So we also have this sutta called the Sappurisa Anisansa Sutta, and that's in the Anguttara Nikāya chapter 4, discourse number 242. And it talks about the benefits of relying on a good person. And there's these 4 benefits. The first is growth in noble virtue. The second is concentration. Third is wisdom. Fourth is liberation. And what this really explicitly says is that when you associate with good people, they're always giving you a good example to follow. They would be practicing virtues dear to the noble ones, virtues that align with the Noble Eightfold Path. And so when you're around them, it's very hard to think that you would want to break them when you're around good people. Or even if you did accidentally or on purpose break something in terms of one's virtue, you would quickly attend to it or come closer to attending to it. And same with concentration, that usually around sappurisas, one has a tendency to practice. Even when talking, one tends to talk with yoniso manasikara on, that you want to ensure that right view is still there, not just to blindly talk, heedlessly talk, and allow everything to almost like break down. Being around good people, sappurisas, usually means that they are tending to practice. And so even when they're speaking, even when they're eating, even when they're doing things, they do their best always to not lose the right view and not divert from the Noble Eightfold Path. And so concentration is one aspect of that. And then the third one being wisdom is really wisdom grows when you practice. And wisdom grows when you cultivate such a factor as being around noble ones, good people. Because there's actually probably about 10 or 15 suttas within chapter 55 of the Samyutta Nikāya, which actually talk about all the different kinds of wisdom that can arise when you cultivate associating with good people, listening to the good Dhamma, a wise attention, and practicing in accordance with the teaching, the Dhamma. And it's quite amazing the different kinds of wisdom that can be developed. And then the fourth one is liberation. Well, given that good people are all heading and walking the Noble Eightfold Path and heading to the final destination of liberation at some point in the future, then of course, if you are associating and being around noble ones, then the benefit of that is that you're also going in that same direction. And so liberation is something that can be realized at some point in the future as well. So these are the 4 benefits of relying on a good person. There are many suttas about giving, as in dāna, and it also applies to sappurisas or good persons. And the sutta that is here is the Sappurisa Dāna Sutta, which is in Anguttara Nikāya chapter 8, discourse 37, and it talks about 8 gifts of a good person. So giving that is pure, excellent, timely, allowable, giving after investigation, giving often, and while giving, one's mind is settled in confidence, and having given, one is elated. So those are the 8 gifts. But the Buddha goes on to say, one gives what is pure and excellent, allowable drinks and food at the proper time. One gives gifts often to fertile fields of merit, to those who lead the spiritual life. One does not feel regret, having given away many material things. Those with deep insight praise the gifts given in this way. Having thus practiced charity with a mind freely generous, one intelligent and wise, rich in faith or conviction, is reborn in a pleasant, unafflicted world. And so a good person has these wonderful abilities to give and knows where to give as well. That's the other thing, that it knows where the field of merit is, which are the 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings. And at the same time has relinquished stinginess in many respects. I mean, this type of giving, relinquished stinginess, maybe not fully, but to a large extent. and is very charitable and generous. Generous not just with material things, but immaterial things such as the Dhamma. And in many ways, what you see when you encounter a good person is, the door is open to their home, the door is open to Dhamma discussions, the door is open to help wherever is possible, to answer questions, to just enable Dhamma to flow. And when you look at this particular sutta, you realize that these are many benefits and blessings of being around a good person, to gain not just in a material sense, but much more so in the sense of how they cultivate their life, the remainder of their life, how they practice, how they remove the defilement of stinginess, how they have the intention towards relinquishment, really, which is the niccameva, and how they actually develop others as well through their gifts of giving, that through their wisdom and practice and insight, that if you're around them, then you also pick up a lot. And so this is just another sutta just to round off this story of Sakka, that Sakka was very blessed to have been around the Buddha, to hear the Dhamma from the Buddha, saddhamma, true teaching, and then to realize fruit of stream entry. And for us, we can do so in a similar way, associating with the good people, people with the good qualities, people that are walking the Noble Eightfold Path. We can listen to the true teachings of the Buddha, make sure we check back to the suttas that are remaining, investigate, question, penetrate, realize, practice, and develop those other things as well, such as wise attention, yoniso manasikara, ensuring that we're still with the right view, that our minds haven't got perverted with misapprehending certain things out in the world, and taking refuge in Buddha Dhamma Sangha and practicing accordingly with the Dhamma. So I'll end this here. We can share the merit with all sentient beings. May all beings be happy and well. May all beings be free from suffering. Wishing you all well. Blessings of the Triple Gem. Teruan Saranai.